There we go. People can hear me. I hope I can hear myself, so I know it's working. Right, Yasmin, good question. So I tell you, I can't think of the timings off the top of my head, so I'm going to have to go and do a little bit of research, and you can follow it along with me if you want. I'm typing in OCR History GCSE, because you can work this out for yourself, which is exactly what I'm going to do because you've asked me the question. If you're worried about timing, the main thing I always recommend is to rush one of the questions that's not worth many marks. Or if you come across a question that you're not sure about, rush that one, because you could spend ages on it if you're not sure about it and not get as many marks as you could on another question that you do understand and get really clearly. So I've typed out OCR History GCSE. I want from 2015, because that's the latest version of the exam. It's just loading up on my screen now. And then I'm looking for past papers, etc. Assessment materials. I've gone for assessment materials. I'm actually on the wrong thing. So I need to go type in again. OCR History B GCSE. Because I know that's what the spec we're doing. Spec Modern World OCR History G. And from 2013, because that one hasn't changed actually, I've got that wrong. So you want to type OCR History B Modern World 2013. That's what we've got to. I'm going Assessment Materials and I'm clicking Unit. So write this down. OCR History B GCSE. That's what I've typed in, and I've clicked Assessment Materials, and we want Unit A013. It says Aspects of International Relations with the USA 1919 to 41. So I'm clicking it. Now, how long have you got for the paper? 2 hours. How many marks are available? I'm looking on the front page of this. Total number of marks is 81 marks. So that tells me, because I can remember doing maths GCSE, you see, it's going to be embarrassing if I get this wrong, that you can work out the percentage, because if you say it's 120 minutes, so you're 81 divided by 120 equals 0.675 marks per minute. Right, so if you want to go through, you can think, right, the first question in this assessment booklet is Study Source A, and it says it's worth 7 marks. So if my calculations are right, I've got my 0.675 on my cracked iPhone screen. If I times, so 7 marks per minute, actually that's not going to work, is it? Better way to work it out. 7 divided by 81, because that's how many marks are available. 7 divided by 81. So, times by 100, 7 marks is worth 8.6% of the paper. Then I'm going with 120 times 0.86. No. 0.086. 120 times 0.086 equals 10 minutes 32 seconds. So you can go through the paper like that. That was a bit off the cuff there, unprepared, but yeah, you work out what percentage of the overall marks a question is worth, and then you work out what percentage of time from that. So I worked out that 7 marks was 8.6% of the overall marks of 81 available marks, and 8.6% of 120 minutes is 10 minutes, 0.32. So you can go through the paper and work it out for yourself. It would bore people silly if I just went through doing it myself. Might be worth having a look at the biggest question that you should be spending the most amount of time on. There's 10 markers. You must remember to choose to answer one question of 2 or 3, where it says you must answer one question. So you'd answer 2 A, B, C or 3 A, B, C. And then you've done the USA. you must make sure you scroll to the right section of A New World as well. If you see stuff about Iraq, you're not answering that. You scroll past that, you get, oh, I've just done the Cold War stuff, haven't we? Get past that to the USA section, you should recognise that. You're like, yep, we've studied that, that's what we're going to do about. And you'll notice in the USA section there's also questions that are worth 10 marks. So you're not going to get asked anything that's worth more than 10 marks, but they all come as a set, A, B, C. Make sure you choose one of the questions where it tells you to choose one of the questions. Right, so Yasmin, hopefully that's answered your question. If it's not, give us a clue. Flipping heck, I've got loads of requests down here, so I'm going to work down to Jasmine. What were the social consequences of the Wall Street crash? Right, off the cuff, here we go. I've got my USA textbook down here. It's around here somewhere. Well, social consequences of the Wall Street crash is, if you use the revision sheet, you'll be aware that people actually starved to death. You know, people lost everything. It's wrong to say everybody, and that's a mistake people often make in history exams. They generalise, and they'll say, oh, everyone lost everything. It's not true. But huge numbers of people lost a great deal. And so people who might have been doing perfectly fine with a house, with a mortgage they borrowed from the bank, with a job, feeding their children, suddenly find themselves living in a Hooverville and unable to find a job, unable to find food. In other words, people scrabbling through rubbish dumps to try to find rotting meat to feed their family. That's one thing. It's in one of the textbooks I've used 1 year with in one particular school. It's stuck in my mind that the woman took off her glasses. It's a true story, this. She took off her glasses to eat the rotting meat so that she couldn't see the maggots, and her children were eating the same thing. 2%. No, that's not what percentage of this exam of our overall grade. The percentage of the exam of the overall grade, I'm going to double check this one. I'm going in the specification this time, same part of the website, and it will tell me very quickly exactly the percentage, so I'm not doing off the cuff. This particular exam tomorrow is worth 45% of the qualification. Your controlled assessment was 25%, this one's 45%. And look for some other social consequences, because I've got a really good textbook somewhere under all this. So I'll tell you some really useful stuff. Well, I'll look for that in a minute. I know it's around here somewhere. I've got the A-level textbook there, that's always useful. Right. Other social consequences of the Wall Street crash would be people often turned more against immigrants because they didn't want the immigrants coming in undercutting their wages. So there was an increased tension in the United States, you could say. What are people chucking about percentages on here? It's 45%. Yes, Brighton, you've got it right. So, yes, Jasmine, so we said people struggling to get by. Hoovervilles is one example. People reacting negatively towards immigrants often happened as well. You'll find things about malnutrition in New York on the website. Cases of people actually ending up in hospital with malnutrition because they're not able to eat enough. So there's just some of the social consequences. It just caused great hardship. Yeah, I think you could go on to talk about farming, but that's not specifically associated with the Wall Street crash. Farmers were struggling anyway, and things got worse for farmers during the 1930s, but that was largely because of the Dust Bowl and tariffs being increased. Can I go through what happened at Yalta and Potsdam, please? Yes, I can, Lucas. I will do that for you. Of course I will. Right, so the big difference is Yalta happened before the war ended, and the Potsdam Conference took place when the war had ended. I'm just going to click to see what I've got on the revision slides. Make sure I'm talking about the things that I've put on there so it tallies with what you've got. And what are the big things? Well, the main thing that they fell out about at both the Yalta and Potsdam conferences was Poland, the country of Poland. And it boils down to this. And I'm pretty sure it's on the thing here. Yeah, so if you're looking at the beginnings of the Cold War key knowledge page, that will help you here. You can see that in 1939, it's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 boxes down. Something that surprised the world in 1939 was that Hitler signed a deal with Stalin where they agreed to divide Poland. So half of it would be controlled by Germany, half of it would be controlled by the Soviet Union. And people were very surprised by this deal because they thought that Hitler and Stalin should really be mortal enemies. Anyway, the war happens, and after the war starts, remember, because Germany invaded Poland. Now, at the same time, often forgotten in history, but it happened at the same time, the Soviet Union also invaded Poland. We didn't declare war on them. We declared war on Nazi Germany, because it's them who'd been pushing us, and we get to say one more thing, here's the line in the sand, we're not having this. Anyway, you fast forward a bit, the Nazis do end up fighting the Soviets, and then the war ends. And what happens, if we've got Europe, you'll be able to recognise this as Europe, and you can see why I could have been that teacher. And what happened, the Soviet Union's over this side, France is over that side, and as the war came to a close, the Soviet Union army pushed the Nazis back through Poland towards Germany. So that meant the Red Army, which is what you call the Soviet Union army, the Red Army were in Eastern Europe. And on this side, you had the Allies who invaded into France, D-Day, if you ever see Saving Private Ryan, and they attacked that way towards Germany. And so you ended up with the Red Army in control of Eastern Europe and the Allies in control of Western Europe. Now, here comes the bit where I'm actually getting to here, why they fell out over Poland. Because the Soviet Union said that they wanted to keep the half of Poland that they got when they made the deal with the Nazis before the war. Now, the British people, they weren't willing to accept that. And the Americans were firm allies of the British and actually agreed with them. Because what right did the Soviet Union to just say, we're having this bit of Poland, thank you very much. And they had no right to do it at all. British people had gone to war and died because of the Nazis invading Poland, so they weren't happy about the Soviet Union just taking Poland. But the problem was there was very little the Allies could do about it because the Red Army was in Poland. So the Soviet Union controlled Poland. They could basically do what they like, unless the Allies were willing to fight the Soviet Union, which they definitely weren't, because they just fought a world war. They didn't want to start another. So they protested, but they couldn't do anything about it. Another thing, well, if I go through the separate bits, so if you've got the Yalta Conference on my page here, what was agreed? They agreed that Germany would be split into 4. They agreed, and this is a significant one as well for you, Lucas, and everybody else, at Yalta it was agreed. Potsdam, of course, Roosevelt sadly died, Churchill lost the election, so there was only Stalin left from before, and Truman was very anti-Soviet. He thought he had to stand up to Stalin because people hadn't stood up to Hitler, in Truman's opinion, and the Second World War had happened. So he thought the way to deal with dictators was to stand up to them. So at Potsdam, Yalta, there was more things that were agreed on than disagreed on, apart from Poland, remember, is a big one. They even agreed on free elections, although Stalin didn't ever intend to keep that. By Potsdam, I mean, I've got it on the revision sheet there, you've got the fact that Truman's replaced Roosevelt. There's also the fact that he'd set up communist government in Poland by the point of Potsdam, despite agreements made at Yalta and despite the wishes of most of the people in Poland. So yeah, what were the 3 big disagreements at Potsdam? Germany. Stalin wanted to cripple Germany. The US did not want to repeat the mistakes of the Treaty of Versailles. What's going on here? Is the stream gone off? That seems to have booted people. Sorry about that. Where am I up to? Yeah, Potsdam. They disagreed on reparations. The Soviets wanted to cripple Germany, whereas the Allies didn't want to repeat the mistakes they'd made at the Treaty of Versailles. What? I will batter me too. And as I've said, by Potsdam, it had become really clear that Stalin was never going to keep his promises of free elections. So there you go, Lucas. There's a bit of explanation. If I sum it up, Yalta, they generally agreed on everything apart from Poland. Potsdam, loads of disagreements. Truman wanted to stand up to Stalin. So there we go. Look, the cat's made an appearance. Must be this sandwich. It's brought him in. That's Nigel, by the way. Does 1 mark per minute still work fine, like roughly? Not really, Kitty, because it's 81 marks and you've got 120 minutes. But I suppose if you did go with that and it worked for you, you'd have, well, a good few minutes left at the end to play with. So yeah. Right, I've worked my way down to Bella. Can I go over the New Deal, please? Well, yeah, I can, so I'm going to get the revision sheet on the New Deal. I'm sure I'll tell you about the New Deal. I'll have another bite of my sandwich. I'll tell you about my favourite thing that Roosevelt did. So, the people in America, they were fed up with the way government was being run. They were fed up with being told everything will work itself out, which is the sort of message that Hoover and his government were sending. Everything will be fine, everything will work itself out. We don't want to make people dependent on the government. Roosevelt came along in his election campaign and promised the people a new deal. Things will be different. He was so charismatic, his personality was magnetic, people listened to him. He connected with people, which Hoover didn't do. And he was able to sell this idea without really going into any detail about what the New Deal was. But we found out what the New Deal was, and he was going to change things. And one of my favourite bits of his New Deal, often overlooked in favour of the alphabet agencies, is the Emergency Banking Act. You know, I love it so much, I'm even going to write it down on a piece of paper, because I think it was a great idea. Now, I think I've said this in one of my other live streams. To have a healthy economy, you need healthy banks. And the banks were not very healthy. Loads of them had gone bust. It's on my revision sheet, you can look at how many, but lots of banks had gone bust in the Great Depression. And Roosevelt recognised that you need a strong banking system to have a healthy economy. So he goes on the radio, fireside chat, and he says to the people, look, I'm going to make things a bit difficult for you because you're not going to be able to get the money out of the banks. I'm going to shut the banks for a few days. Now trust me, when the banks reopen, it will only be the banks that are trustworthy. Any banks that are in danger of collapse will shut. Don't put your money in them. You won't be able to, so they'll shut them down. If you trust me, and I send those inspectors in to inspect the banks, when the banks reopen after a few days, I need to be able to trust you, the American people, to put your faith back in the banks and deposit your money back in the banks. People listened to him, with the effect that by the beginning of April 1933, there had been $1 billion more money put back into the banks by the American public. So in one swift action, he managed to get people to trust in the banks, put their money back in their banks instead of hiding it under their bed or wherever they'd found to hide it, and as a result the banks were healthier. It could help the economy, of course it could. Now what else did he do? He did a lot of different things. I'm not going to go through them all, you can see them on the sheet. People are often confused about alphabet agencies. Well, if a government decides to do something, it doesn't just happen. So for example, if the government decided today to make smoking completely illegal, it wouldn't just happen. They'd have to set up a group to make it happen. How would they enforce it? How would they police it? And so on and so forth. So when he passed laws to make things happen, he set up agencies, groups of people employed to make it happen. And he created a lot of alphabet agencies in the first New Deal. Because remember, there's two New Deals. Two of the most famous, where can see a lot of them. Two of the most famous are the AAA, which was to sort out the problems in agriculture, and the CCC. Now, I always want to sing the bottom of the deep blue CCC. I'm going to resist that temptation because this is an important time just before your exams, but it's there in my head because I'm still childish. Anyway, the CCC, it aimed to help young people, young men, not women, young men, because in a time of economic crisis, it's often the young who struggle to get jobs. The old, they've already got jobs, some of them, and the ones who lose their jobs, well, they've got the experience to be able to get new jobs. Young people, they might have the same qualifications, but they're lacking experience, which is why if you get to university, or even in sixth form, you should try to get as much work experience as you can. Anyway, these young people struggling to get jobs, so the idea of the CCC is you signed on for 6 months, you were chipped out somewhere to a camp to do some work, whether it's planting trees, looking after national parks, digging canals, whatever it was, something that would help the country. By the end of the CCC's existence, 2.5 million young people were helped out by it. So that suggests it had a big impact. The AAA dealt with the issue that people were growing too much, farmers were growing too much, and in supply and demand, if there's too much of something, the price plummets. The example I always give. If I was the only person with an iPhone in the whole of the UK, I'd be able to sell this for probably tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of pounds, because there'd be somebody rich enough and willing to pay that amount. If everybody had an iPhone, I'm not going to get that amount for it. You see, supply and demand. So what he had to do was to try to convince the farmers to grow less, and effectively he gave them quotas. He says, right, here's how much you can grow with the amount of land you've got. If you stick to this quota, you'll get a bonus. So effectively he was encouraging them to grow less by paying them for growing less. I'll have another bite me quality sandwich. There we go. Bear with me. Got a few questions down there. A timeline thing. Use my revision things. It's largely a timeline, but yeah, type it in Google. You'll find a timeline. I'll try and find one in a bit, if you want. Right. A lot of love for Nigel. I'm seeing down there. Okay. So, back to Bella and the New Deal. Generally speaking, the American people... Oh, look, there's some more. What's this? Thanks, Miss Satley. Oh, brilliant. Thanks. Some chips to go with my sandwich. I think Nigel wants to go out. So, generally people really accepted it and really approved of it as well. But he did face opposition from the New Deal, from some people who thought that he'd gone too far, that he was increasing the power of the president too much, he was acting like a dictator. You might see this in some cartoons, if they're cartoons, and you really want to look at the opposition of the New Deal, because there's quite a high chance that there'll be a cartoon about Roosevelt, because it's happened quite a lot in the past. So you might want to see why people are writing things that are critical of Roosevelt. Now, some people thought he'd spent too much as well. He was acting like a communist, spreading out the wealth. And some people said that it had not gone far enough. And there's people who you can mention, like Huey Long. So that's a bit about the New Deal. Can you go through the Tet Offensive is my next one from the man Brighton. Yes, I can. Basically, what happened was, up to the point of 1968, the American people had been led to believe that the American soldiers, the American army, were winning in Vietnam. And not only that, that they were the goodies. They were the good guys fighting the communists and saving the poor Vietnamese from the terrible fate of communism. 1968 was a turning point in the war because two things happened. My Lai and the horrible massacre of women and children, when it got back to the United States, when it was reported, it became clear to the American people that the soldiers were not acting like the good guys anymore. And the Tet Offensive, when it appeared on the news broadcast, made the Americans think, hold on a minute, how are we winning this war if the Vietcong are managing to attack in the cities and take over the embassies? So that's the key thing about the Tet Offensive. And if you go to why did the USA withdraw from Vietnam on the revision sheets, there's a whole section about the Tet Offensive which kind of elaborates on what I've said. Key thing to say, the Tet was the New Year holiday of Vietnam, and the Vietcong chose that particular time to attack because people would be off their guard, and they attacked over 100 cities and towns in Vietnam at once. They did manage to get inside the US embassy, but actually, it was a disaster for the Vietcong in military terms, because you remember the whole time in the war they were fighting guerrilla warfare, fight and hide, because the Americans were too strong for them. Well, in this case, they came out of the hiding and fought the Americans head on. And the result of that is they lost so many important souls, so many soldiers that were hard to replace. Experienced, dedicated Vietcong troops. It said they probably lost about 10,000. So militarily, it was a defeat for the Vietcong. But when it appeared on the television screens of the American people, and they sat there eating the burgers, I'll do an impression, like eating the burgers, and going, what the hell is this? They told us we're winning this war, and those damn Vietcong are in our embassy. And so then support for the war started to drop, and actually opposition to the war increased. It showed the American people that they were probably not winning the war quite as they'd been led to believe. And it was crucial in turning public opinion against the war. Now remember, in a democracy, when people are voted into power, they have to listen to public opinion or they won't win any votes. So it changes the government attitude towards the war, because not long after the Tet Offensive and My Lai, President Johnson decided he wouldn't try to be re-elected. That's probably because he'd become so unpopular with what had happened in the Vietnam War. And President Nixon, who took over, he tried to get America out of the war, and he did eventually. So there we go. Right, I'm going back through some percentages. And what tactics did the Vietcong use? Brilliant. Guerrilla warfare tactics. I always think of it as deadly hide and seek. There's some good videos on this on the internet. Effectively what they did is they tried to stay out of sight. The Charlie Company, which was the group of soldiers, the company of soldiers that did the My Lai massacre, they'd lost a number of men before they went to My Lai, injury and killed, and they'd never seen a Vietcong. They were being killed and injured by booby traps. One of the most famous, I'm going to write this down for you, which you should mention in the exam, was a punji trap. So the Americans would go on patrol. But like I say, it's like deadly hide and seek. The American troops gauged success on body count, how many of the enemy they could kill. Problem with that, it was very difficult to tell civilian from Vietcong because they didn't wear uniform. Anyway, they'd go out on patrol to try and find the Vietcong, and the Vietcong would leave traps. So there might be a covering of leaves, and underneath the covering of leaves would be sharpened bamboo stakes. And so when, this is going to be a picture of an American soldier, here we go, about to step in the punji trap. Now he's also got a peanut head, but we'll ignore that. And when he stands on the bamboo, the punji trap, if it could be a small trap, it could be a huge trap. Some of them were horrific looking, and if you look on YouTube, you'll see all sorts of the booby traps that the Vietcong used, and they were terrible. Anyway, he puts his foot in, foot goes through spike, and what they also used to do is cover the bamboo, sharpened bamboo stakes in poo. It's incredibly cheap, incredibly effective. In the jungle, you can easily cover it up, and American soldiers lived in fear all the time. They get terrible infections, which is why they put the poo on it. They'd set tripwires tied to grenades. There's one that I've seen on YouTube where in a doorway, you know how you lean a bucket of water on a door and you open the door and the bucket of water falls on somebody? That sort of trick. Except instead of a bucket of water, they had a thing that swung out of the door, a heavy thing that swung out of the door with spikes on the end. So if the American soldier opens that, thing swings in, gets him, kills or badly injures him. So the Vietcong never tried to take on the Americans, except for in the Tet Offensive. They just tried to booby trap, lay mines in roads. If they knew a road was used often by Americans, they always mined it. So those were the tactics that the Vietcong used. Stay out of sight as much as you can. Try to kill as many American soldiers as you can. They used the Ho Chi Minh Trail to supply the Vietcong, which ran through 2 different countries. Not Vietnam, it ran into the south of Vietnam, but through Laos and Cambodia. Now the Americans couldn't stop that, or very easily they couldn't stop it, because it was 2 other countries. So they couldn't invade another 2 countries to stop the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And another thing that they also tried to do is win the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese people. So they would help in the paddy fields, they help collecting the harvest. They would be nice to the Vietnamese peasants, whereas the Americans committed atrocities against the Vietnamese, losing their support. So yeah, I guess, what have I put there? On the essentials sheet, the different ways the US and the communists fought the war and whose tactics were more effective. So there we go. Hopefully that answers your question there, Bishan, the tamer of wolves. Finn, I can go through a bit of Vietnam and how America got involved. Really brutal. Bishop. Have a look on YouTube, because you'll look at it. It's like, well, there was another trap actually that comes into my mind, which is horrendous. You know when you're at when you're a little kid and you're at a soft play. I'm often at these with my little boy, and you have like rollers, and you have to squeeze through the rollers, and they'll roll as you go through, and you'll flop out the other side. Well, they'd have those in the floor, but with thin spikes in them. So if an American put his foot through it, the American's entire leg would go through the rollers, and each time the thing span round, the spikes would go in his leg. And they could be like big enough for the whole man to go through. Just horrendous. Cheap, effective, terrible. So where am I up to? Please don't answer dumb questions. I'll try my best not to. Zach, is that the Lublin thing? Yes, Bishan, that is the Lublin thing, because the British wanted to put the London Poles into power. The Soviets wanted to put the Lublin Poles into power in Poland. What's Tet Offensive? Done the Tet Offensive tactics. So I'm up to, can you get through a bit of Vietnam and how America got involved? Well, Finn, I'd recommend, and all of you, get onto the thing, get on the essentials. I've put it into 5 bits, so you can write loads about how the Americans got involved in Vietnam. Just don't another bite of my sandwich. Right. Domino Theory. I've lost my pen. What do I do with it? I'm not sure. So, Domino Theory. This one's quite a straightforward one. If you make a domino train, the idea is you push the domino and the dominoes all fall over. So in a big chain, like that. Now the prevailing thought at the time in America, prevailing is a good word to use by the way, the prevailing thought in America at the time was that the domino theory was accurate. If one country fell to communism, countries next door would be at serious risk of also falling to communism. And the reason they thought this is because the Soviet Union fell to communism. Next to that, China fell to communism. Korea is next to China. Vietnam's next to... And so the theory is rubbish. It is not true. That you don't. It's not like a disease. You don't go, oh, they've got communism, we're going to catch it. Don't work like that. It appealed to those places. There was a lot of poverty, and it was a way of doing things differently. And Cuba, for example, it turned communist, you know about that, miles away from any of these places. So the theory was flawed, but the prevailing feelings at the time were that it was true. And so America thought if they did not stop it in Cuba, it was just going to carry on spreading. So they had to take a stand somewhere, and where better place than Vietnam? That's one thing. Another reason why the US got increasingly involved in Vietnam was because they'd spent a lot of money propping up the French. Like, the French had tried to fight to keep control of Vietnam. They'd originally controlled the country, and the Americans had invested so much money paying the French, it would have been a terrible waste if Vietnam just fell to communism. Maybe my biggest, now I reflect on it, the thing which I think was the main reason America got involved in Vietnam was political necessity. I would be, especially if I was an A-star student, mentioning the fact, as I've said before, that America is a democracy. Presidents only become presidents because people vote for them. And the thought at the time in America, it was popular to be anti-communist. The Americans was worried about communism. There was something that was called the Red Scare, fear of communism that was going on in America in the 50s. If you were a politician in America in the 50s and you were suspected of being sympathetic to communism, that could be the end of your career. That could be it, finished, no more. It was the same for actors, singers, anybody. If you were suspected of being a communist sympathiser, end of career. That could be it. So, it was, by the opposite side, it was beneficial politically to appear to be strong against communism, to appear to be a person who wants to stand up to communism. So, that's the reason that the American politicians in control of the country didn't want to just leave Vietnam to fall to communism, because they could be accused of being too soft on communism and lose power, because it's a democracy and people vote for people. There's also the fact that South Vietnamese government was ineffective. So you could say, the Americans probably didn't want to have to get involved, but they kind of had to, because the South Vietnamese capitalist government was corrupt and ineffective, and it wasn't able to do the job itself, so therefore somebody had to step in to stop the Vietcong taking over. So those are the two main ways. Hopefully that's useful for you, Fim. Phantom Lord LJ, whoever you are, great name by the way. I've answered what the Tet Offensive is. I hope you're not too hurt. But if you want me to go over anything again, then fine. I'm scrolling down. I'm a bit behind time. I don't know what Luciano's is. Yeah, no problem, Lucas. Please don't answer dumb questions. Yeah, I'm doing my best, Zach. Timeline, yeah. If you find yourself a time, plenty of websites. Phantom Lord LJ, thanks. Why did Khrushchev put missiles in Cuba? There's one for Kitty Mayer. Right. Oh, I've not got the Cuban Missile Crisis thing on my computer. Not to worry, I'll do this one off the bat. I'll take another bite of my sandwich. Right. The Cold War was a lot about propaganda, not appearing to be. Because, of course, the Soviet Union and the USA could never actually fight each other, because it could mean the end of the world, nuclear Armageddon. But they always wanted to get one up on each other. So it's like a propaganda war in many ways. So, a country so close to America turning communism was a huge propaganda victory for the Soviet Union. He must have woke up to that news, Khrushchev, and thought, my goodness me, it's my birthday. All my birthdays have come at once. This is absolutely fantastic. So, by the same logic, it would have also been terrible if that country then fell again. So, it was in Khrushchev's interest to keep communism in Cuba. Furthermore, the Soviet Union at the time were struggling to keep up in the arms race with America. America had more advanced nuclear missiles and they had more long-range missiles. They also had missiles quite close to the Soviet Union, positioned in places like Italy and Turkey. Now, I think nuclear missiles, you don't launch them and bang, they have to fly through the sky. So just like if I was to throw a tennis ball at Charlie's Toys down there, I'd hit it. Here is a hair bubble, not mine. See? Hit it. However, further down the room, turn this a little bit. There's a teapot. Can you see the teapot? Right, I'm going to try hit the teapot. Missed. Nowhere near. Now this is the logic. Nuclear missiles do not hit accurately what they're trying to hit, and they take longer to get something that's further away. So if you fired a missile at America from the Soviet Union, you might be able to get there eventually, but there's a greater chance that your enemy could shoot it out of the sky before it hit the target. However, as you could see from distance, I can hit that. It's much more accurate and a lot quicker. If I was throwing something like the opposite side of the room, it would take even longer to get there. It's like if somebody throws a tennis ball at you. If they stood right here, they're going to hit you. If they stood over there, it's going to be less likely for them to hit accurately. And somebody else could bat it out the sky before he got to you. So Khrushchev, for military reasons, he wanted to get missiles in Cuba because it was so close to the United States. It would mean his medium-range missiles, rather than his long-range missiles, could hit most of the major cities in America, or all of the major cities in America, which he didn't have the benefit of. So yeah, it was a propaganda victory for him. He also, there was reason to believe that America might try to invade Cuba, because the Bay of Pigs incident had happened, and it had been very embarrassing for Khrushchev. So to deter that from happening, if Khrushchev gets nuclear missiles in Cuba, America can't invade. Won't have another bite. So those are some reasons. There's more on my sheet, and it's explained a little bit more. But hopefully that answers that question for you. Alright, here we go. Zach, I'm trying to ignore dumb questions. Thanks, Rowan. What was the attack on Plyku? I've gone past here. What? What is going on? Right, the attack on Plyku in the Vietnam War, and what did it do? It's not really that important for your exam, I don't think. Give me that one. No. I don't know. Gone over it, but let's have a look. I'll come back to that one. So, why are you crying about questions? I want to encourage your order, but apparently not. That's not all about you. Can you talk about Ho Chi Minh and Diem and all of that? Yes, I can. Ho Chi Minh was the communist leader of Vietnam. He was in control of the north. Ho Chi Minh City is the capital city, and he wants all of Vietnam to be communist. Diem is a puppet ruler towards the early 60s. I think he was killed in 1963. But he was the puppet ruler, because a puppet controlled by somebody else. Who's he being controlled by? America. And he was incredibly unpopular. The only thing going for him, for the Americans, was he was capitalist, anti-communist, but was also corrupt. Loads of the money that America was sending Vietnam to fight the communists, or South Vietnam, he was taking, spooning off the top. And so he eventually was killed. And when you're thinking about why did America get involved, or increasingly involved, you could say because Diem was so unpopular, he was turning Vietnamese towards communism and away from capitalism, because he was acting like an idiot, basically. There you go. Ellie, I can summarise the Wall Street crash. Do you mean what happened, a blow-by-blow account? So I can do that for you, because you might get asked about what happened in the actual Wall Street crash. And to do this, I'm going to use the A-level textbook, because it really breaks it down. I wonder if you can see that. Is it? Probably not. It's a bit too blurry. So you'll have to watch this back later. It automatically saves on my YouTube channel and write it down if you need to. So basically, in September 1929, there was a sharp drop in share prices. This had happened before, so people weren't really panicking in September. But on the 19th of October, people began to panic because the shares hadn't gone back up again, and they always had done in the past. So 3.5 million shares were bought and sold, and prices began to tumble because there were more people selling than buying. That was Saturday the 19th of October. On Tuesday the 22nd of October, the stock market seemed to recover. You don't need to know all these dates and everything. This is basically what happened. Stock market dropped. It always recovered in the past, but it wasn't doing this time. By October, people started to panic. A date that you might want to write down: Thursday, 24th of October, 1929, Black Thursday. Called Black Thursday because it was so bad for Wall Street. 13 million shares were sold, and prices fell so quickly that people were panicking, thinking, well, I need to sell my shares before they drop any further. Of course, because people were panicking and trying to sell their shares, they were having to drop the price to get rid of them. So the prices were just tumbling and tumbling. Friday, the 25th, the day after Black Thursday, some bankers met and thought, what can we do? We need to sort this problem out, we're going to lose everything. Let's invest loads of our money into the stock market. Prices should then go up. So they did, and actually it steadied the share prices. And these bankers must have gone for the weekend thinking, brilliant, we've done a great job. And President Hoover, here's one that you can use in why Roosevelt won the election. Hoover assured the Americans that the panic was over and that businesses and banking would soon recover. But Tuesday the 29th of October 1929, now they need to think of more original names, I think, because they also call that Black Tuesday. And what they should really have called it, if there's Black Thursday, was Even Blacker Tuesday. Because 16.5 million shares were traded, some shares lost all value, and suicides were reported. So there we go. Hopefully that's helped you there, really, for the actual Wall Street crash. And the result of it, if you're thinking of the effects of it, is that banks had lent so much money to people to buy on the margin, they couldn't get that money back. And so banks went bust. And people who had nothing invested in the stock market and just had their savings in a bank, if the bank goes bust, they also lose everything. So it was horrendous for America. And that's how it links to the economy, you see. Because as I've said before, healthy banks equals, well, a healthy economy needs healthy banks. So there we go. Gamig, I'm sorry about your granddad, but I'm not sending you any money because you're probably going to use it to go on holiday. But thanks anyway. How do mummies and daddies make babies? Brilliant. Legend of Unite. Well, if I have to explain this to you, then you probably should go to a biology revision session. But if you're asking such silly questions, the stork brings it. Good answer. Oh, thanks, Bishop. Shocking. Why did some industries suffer before 1929? All right. Here we go. So, businesses in the 1920s benefited from the boom, or helped to cause the boom, for a lot of reasons. One of them was mass production. So if you got a car before 1929, it's all on my revision thing, this, of course, again, keep referring to them. If you got a car in before the 1920s, in a Ford factory, it was being created by just a few really skilled people. And they'd do the windscreen wipers, they'd do the engine, they'd sort the exhaust, they'd do the seats, and it would take ages to make the car. And then Ford had a great idea. Let's make a big conveyor belt that goes around a huge factory, and each person specialises. So if your job every day, put the steering wheel on, fix it in, make sure it's right. Next, put the steering wheel on, fix it. You're going to get really fast at putting steering wheels on, and you're going to get really good at it. So what would happen is the car would travel around the factory, and the people would be at stations and would have a time to put the things where they needed to go. And it cut the time of producing so far down, and the cost as well. Now, why did this link to industry suffering? Well, loads of companies could take advantage of this method of mass production, radio companies, fridge companies, but some companies couldn't. Farming, for example. They can't do mass production, it doesn't work like that. Also, the coal industry suffered for two reasons. One, because of electricity, a new way of powering things, but maybe a bigger reason is because of cars. Coal would be used on trains, which is another industry that suffered because of the rise of the car industry. Less people using the railroads, which is what they call it in America. Agriculture is the one that suffered the most, and this was largely because of overproduction and tariffs. Before the 20s, they were producing loads. In the 20s, they were also producing a lot. The difference was, before the 20s, in the First World War and shortly afterwards, they could sell crops to Europe. Europe was still recovering, or earlier than that, fighting the First World War. So the American farmers could produce as much as they want, they'd always have somebody to sell to. Tariffs put taxes on foreign goods coming into the United States. And foreign companies and foreign countries were upset about this. So what did they do? They put tariffs on American goods coming into their country. And suddenly, American farmers found it difficult to sell their produce abroad. And as supply and demand, if you're producing loads of something, you're going to have to drop the price to get rid of it. And so prices were tumbling, farmers were struggling, and there we go. There was also increased competition from places like Canada and Australia at the time. There we go. I'm going to go back down a little bit. Well, I've lost my place here. Alright, okay. It was a thorn in the side of America. You've been eating for too long. Yeah, I've been eating for too long. Will you still get marks if you write about something correct, but it's not on the mark scheme? Yes, you will. Don't worry about that. If it's, people always say, will they know if you get the exact figure? No, probably not. But if you get it too far out, then they'll go, what? That looks weird. That's not right. And they'll look it up. If you're thinking, I can't remember if it's 1,124 or what, go, well, over 1,000. You can get around it by using that. But yeah, you will still get marks if you write about something correct, because they can't possibly write everything that's down on the mark scheme. And if you look at the mark schemes, it says often examiners need to give credit for things that are not mentioned here. Right. The Gulf of Tonkin incident. Yes, I can. So basically, with the Gulf of Tonkin incident, what happened was American ships were just off the coast of North Vietnam in the Gulf of Tonkin, which is the sea where the ships were. It was the middle of the night, and they reported that they were being fired upon by torpedo boats, quite small, quite fast. Not like the battleship, which I think was called the USS Maddox, if I'm just thinking off the top of my head there. Anyway, the American ship started firing into the night. Some American planes tried to locate these torpedo boats. They reported being fired on a couple of times in that night. Did it happen? No one will ever know. I think probably not. But, and this is the word I'm using, the American government used it as a pretext. It's like an excuse, a fancy word for excuse. They used it as a pretext for escalating the war, or escalating US involvement in the war, should I rather say. And because it was like the Americans could say, we've been attacked, we must defend ourselves, let's get them. So there you go. Right, there's all sorts of rubbish going on here. Oh, that's alright, Bishan, enjoy your bath. Right, I think we've run out of questions then, have we? Except for Ply Q. So, I mean, it's not a key thing, but basically, before the American Army turned up to fight in Vietnam, the American Air Force was there. And actually, the first American soldiers were there to defend the American air bases, which were bombing North Vietnam. And the Vietcong attacked it, and it was another thing which gave the Americans pretext for war, because American troops were attacked, 9 American troops were killed, 128 wounded. But of course, what it ignores there is that the Americans were in Vietnam where they had absolutely no right to be. So there we go. Right. Yeah, I've got to the bottom now, so I've caught up with myself. So, do we need to know about Vietnamisation? You're never going to ask to write about it in a question. Though it appears in cartoons sometimes. And basically, it was the American idea for being able to get out of Vietnam and not lose Vietnam to communism. Basically, give the Vietnamese, the South Vietnamese, greater control for fighting the war. And well, it didn't work because, of course, Vietnam ended up being completely communist and the South fell to the north, but it was the American idea. We're all flying through the questions. Why did Roosevelt deal with the banking crisis as soon as he became president? Well, because, as I've said, if you're going to have a healthy economy, if the economy is going to recover, you need healthy banks. I'm not really explained why, but it boils down to this. If you are going to have a healthy economy, one of the signs of that is people are going to be employed. And if you are going to employ more people, for people to be employed more than they were before, there's got to be more jobs. And to create more jobs, you've got to create more factories, more businesses, start businesses in the first place, expand businesses. How do you do that? You get loans from the bank. The banks are struggling, they're not lending out money very easily. So they need a load of money being put in the banks, which they can invest themselves into other ventures. So he needed to tackle the banking crisis, and probably, I'm guessing, I'm not Roosevelt myself, but I think he probably saw, this is one I can fix that pretty quickly. And he did, as you can see from the information. The Republican policies in the 1920s were laissez-faire and rugged individualism, Maddie. Basically boils down to them thinking, Legend of Unite, I saw your question, chose to ignore it, because if you put stupid things like that, I'll have to quit the live stream and nobody will learn anything. So I probably think that was funny myself when I was 16. You've made your point, people have had a laugh, we'll leave it at that. So yeah, rugged individualism, laissez-faire, and basically the idea was, laissez-faire was leave it alone, leave it be. It's a French phrase, that's what it translates to, and it's like, let the businesses do as they like. They can pay whatever wage they want an hour, they can work their workers for however long they like an hour, they're not going to get taxed very heavily, and it worked during the 20s. It meant businesses made loads of profit. The logic is, if businesses are making loads of profit, they're going to reinvest that profit, more people are going to get jobs. There we go. Rugged individualism was the idea that the government shouldn't be helping people because it would make people reliant on the government and therefore less strong. So there we go. And hopefully that answers your two questions. Why did Stalin set up the Berlin blockade? Well, I think that Stalin, it'd have to be Stalin himself, but if I was to look at history and think why he set up the Berlin blockade, he has some justification for it. Because, remember, Berlin's divided into 4 zones, controlled by Britain, America, France, Soviet Union. Well, the Soviet Union wanted to keep Germany weak and divided, and so they couldn't recover and invade the Soviet Union ever again. Whereas the West wanted the opposite. They wanted to create a strong Germany that could stand as a buffer against communism in Europe. And what they did is they joined their zones together, but then, now it's on my revision sheet, it's either a day or 2 days. I think it might be a day. You know, if I was in my exam, I'd say almost immediately before. That's the way you could get around it. But anyway, a day or 2 days before the Berlin blockade, the Western powers, Britain, France, the United States, introduced a new currency into Germany, into their zones, without even consulting Stalin. Officially, they were supposed to still be allies and controlling Germany as a group, but they didn't even consult him. He was furious about this, partly because he wasn't consulted, and partly because he didn't want Germany to economically recover. So he thinks, right, we'll blockade Berlin. Longer term, you've also got the problem of Berlin as a bit of an embarrassment to the Soviet Union. Because if you wanted to get from communist Eastern Europe to the West, you can't just go across the border, because there's soldiers there, there's barbed wire, there's fences. There is a way though. Just go into Berlin, walk into the west side, because there's no Berlin Wall, no fences, it's just one open city. Walk to the west side, get on a train, go to West Germany. Jobs are good. So it was embarrassing for the Soviets, because loads of people were streaming out from east to west through Berlin. He wanted to get rid of Berlin as a Western thing. He wanted to get rid of Western influence in Berlin and make it communist. And he thought he could starve them into submission. Why? Oh, spies as well. It was easy for spies to get through to East Germany. Where are we? So, can you go over the end of the Vietnam War and how America withdrew from the war? Yes, I can. So again, I'm going back to... Well, I nearly finished my sandwich. Or burger. So, I think what it basically boils down to, I'm going to give you some of my opinion in here in this, because there's lots of different reasons, is public opinion, as I've told you. If American politicians ignore what the people think, then they're not going to get power. They're going to lose power. So therefore, there were so many people who after 1968 turned against the war, including the media, which is another crucial aspect. People listen to what's in the media. It's happening now in the general election. We get our news from the media. It influences the people. They hear what they listen to what they hear on the news, on the radio, on the television, and they repeat it to people as though it's their original thought. Yeah, because we trust what we're told on the news quite often. Well, when the media was against the war, it turned public opinion even more against the war. So the American politicians had to do something to end the war. So in that respect, the peace movement was influential, My Lai was influential, the media was influential, and the Tet Offensive was influential. And it all boils down to the fact that America is a democracy, and the politicians have to listen to public opinion when it is strongly against something. Well, it's also the point that it was impossible really to win the war. It was just going to go on indefinitely. It's not like the Vietcong were going to run out of people, because, and this is the thing I keep telling my class, or have been doing this year, the American tactics were designed to kill as many Vietcong as possible. But the problem was that American tactics, though it killed a lot of Vietcong, it also killed a lot of innocent people as well. So the American tactics created more enemies than it killed. So they were just creating more and more enemies the way they were going. Napalm destroying jungle. Imagine if you had this beautiful jungle with all these animal species and plants, and they were just burning it. It's going to make you resentful. American soldiers were just burning down Vietnamese houses if they suspected that there were Vietcong sympathisers in the village. There might not be. They had no way of telling. But so much what the Americans did turned Vietnamese people against them. So they'd lost the battle for hearts and minds. And they weren't invading North Vietnam, which is where all the Vietcong were getting the supplies from, because they couldn't, for fear of it bringing China or the Soviet Union into the war. So yeah, there's some things I've been mentioning, and hopefully that explains a bit, in my opinions, this whole idea, public opinion in a democracy. I mean, it was the media that influenced public opinion, and it was events like My Lai and the Tet Offensive which changed the outlook of the media. How much should you write for 6, 7, 8 mark questions? Well, you should spend all of your time. Oh, I can tell you about that, Yasmin. That's easy. I'll tell you about that in a second. Sorry, Jasmine. Yasmin, roughly how much should you write for a 6, 7, 8 mark question? It's how long's a piece of string. I can't give you a good answer for that, I'm afraid. You just keep an eye on the time. If you've broken down the marks and the minutes, as I told you right at the start of this, You won't run out of time. You'll be fine. You should be marking the whole time, writing the whole time. Ollie, that was the film. You're absolutely spot on. The Birth of a Nation. The film, which you're asking about there, was a film in which the Ku Klux Klan were the heroes, and they were saving white women from basically being, well, abused by black men. And it was incredibly popular in the 1920s. And one of the key things there is that President Harding, Warren Harding, I believe, oh no, it was Woodrow Wilson. President Woodrow Wilson, who was president at the end of the, up to 1919, he showed it in the White House and commented on how accurate it was. So it was a really popular film. It shows the intolerance and the racism in American society at the time, and it helps to explain some of the popularity maybe of the KKK. Right, so that's an hour and 10 minutes of a live stream. An hour and 10 minutes of me in this sandwich, which I've nearly finished. I'm going to anything else that you're really worried about. If you're really when it comes to tomorrow, I'll be in school from on. You can come into J5. You can sit and revise in there. I'll answer your questions. I'll hang about. I'll just be preparing for the little revision session we're going to do with you. But hopefully I've answered all the questions you've got there. Yes, but there were a number of presidents, Maddie. Johnson, who you're writing about there, he was president for a huge chunk of the Vietnam War when it was really escalated during the 1960s. So yeah, but then it was Kennedy before that, Eisenhower before that, and Nixon after Johnson. You can just see on a time. If you go on Wikipedia, it'll tell you who was president and when. I'll just give you a chance in case there's any more questions. I guess you can probably also email. I'll get back to you if I've disappeared. Oh, here we go. Quickly, Red Scare. No, Brighton, I'm saying if you're really stressed in the morning, like before school, then I'll be in junior block basically, and I'm not going to say no, go away, I'm busy. You are the priority, until this exam is finished, which is why I've given an hour and 10 minutes of my time to help you. So yeah, there's a little revision session just before your exam anyway, as is customary, I believe. But I mean before school. J5 is my classroom. That's where I'll hang around, or in the junior block anyway. It might be in my office. Anyway, the Red Scare. Yeah, so basically, through the 1950s, Americans were scared of communism. They thought there were communists all over in government. And part of the reason for this was there were actually spies in America that stole the secrets of nuclear bombs. And it sent the Americans into a bit of a panic. There were a few communists, but the problem was exaggerated massively. And because people were so scared, it was like even if you were accused of being a communist sympathiser, it might not be even slightly true. There might be no truth in it whatsoever, but it could end your career. People, yeah, you're gonna have to stop writing rubbish in this stream, or I'm just gonna disappear now because it's putting me off. And I think some people are probably a bit annoyed with me because they're asking me questions and I'm struggling with them. So where was I? The Red Scare. Yeah, so the American president, the American politicians, they had to do what the American public wanted them to do. Again, because it's democracy, public opinion, and they couldn't afford to appear soft on communism. All the American elections in the 50s and the early 60s certainly were all about taking a tough stance on communism, or a big chunk of it. People had to feel reassured that communism was being stopped. It was a fear in America, and so this is why America got involved in Vietnam. It's why they got involved in Korea, if you know about the Korean War. It was why Kennedy stood up to Khrushchev as he did in the Cuban Missile Crisis. And it all blinks back to this idea that it's a democracy and the politicians have to react to how people feel at the time. And people felt scared about communism, which is the Red Scare. It influenced the way that America acted because it's democracy, as I've said. Right then. Are we done? Well, I think I'm probably done. I think you've had enough out of me there. Hour 15 minutes. You can watch it back if you've missed any of the start. You can come and find me in the morning. No problem, Jasmine. My pleasure. Make sure you all get some sleep. Don't be staying up all night revising. It's really important that you rest. And don't put too much pressure on yourself. Just do your best. That's all anybody can ever ask. You know, exams are important, but your health is more important. So get plenty of sleep, get plenty of rest. If you're that stressed, I'll be there in the morning. And good luck. See you later.